This user says or asks, and who is to say that such scriptures speak the truth? Why do these scriptures take precedence over others out there? Even amongst one set of scriptures, there are a myriad of interpretations. This is but one. A perspective, a theory, a truth. Difficult to state that it is truth. Only Sat Chit Ananda is the only truth that one can speak of. Some people have commented the same thing, a very similar thing. But keep in mind, the full doctrine of the Dharma is practical science. We know the scriptures are true because of direct experience. No scripture is better than the other, or better than another, rather, in the major religions. Hinduism was a little bit more specific in their writings, so it can be easier to consume and explain. But the truth is not supposed to be interpreted. It's a mistake that people struggle to interpret anything. We should just know things, because all of us have a supra-consciousness. There is a conscious field in the cosmos, and all of us have that ability to become intuitive and tap into it. The majority of us on this planet just don't know how to use it. So the truth is supposed to be experienced in meditation. Everything needs to be checked and confirmed. And this is actually the practice of Dhamma Vichaya in Buddhism. This explanation in this presentation is not an interpretation. It does come from various scriptures, both Hindu and Buddhist, but truly, those scriptures were written, number one, from monks, masters who've experienced these realities and seen this process. And many other people, including myself, I've seen this process. I've confirmed it numerous times in meditation. Another user asks, why is liberation necessary? Is it? Why can't a soul devolve into a simple, less complex being who doesn't understand pain or suffering and live a less painful life? And how do plants accumulate karma? I thought humans accumulate it. This is a good question because they have a point that less evolved, less intelligent creatures, they are not as aware. They're less conscious too. So basically, for those kinds of creatures, especially insects and bacteria, life is like a dream for them. It's very blurry. They don't remember much. They don't have any discernment. I've explained in the lecture that paying karma is always a painful process because beings with karma have conditioned consciousness. And that karma is contained within defects. Those defects allow them to feel different forms of pain. Devolution makes the mind more conditioned, more perverse, more deteriorated. So when the souls finally reach the plant and mineral kingdoms, they dwell within the submerged aspect of those kingdoms, the underworld. This isn't the case with evolution. With evolution, it's opposite. So when souls are pure and evolving through mineral kingdoms and plant kingdoms, I should say, that's heaven. That's Eden in the Bible. Those are certain levels of nirvana. But on the descending path, those same kingdoms, the plant and mineral, become subterranean levels. They become hells. So it's only after purification when the soul becomes a simple, innocent elemental again, liberated partially. Now, physical minerals and plants don't accumulate much karma, so to speak. But the elementals living in those levels eventually do, because their behavior becomes more complex, and gradually, very slowly, they develop preferences and conditions. Eventually, they'll need a whole new kind of a physical vessel to carry that consciousness. And that next vessel is either going to be, if you're a mineral, it's going to be a plant. If you're a plant, it's going to be an animal, and so on. Another user commented on the idea that it's actually better to assume that you don't have a lot of lives left than to go by this model of 3,000 rounds of evolution, 108 existences. They say, so forth, who all claim that this humanity is at the end and no longer has luxury of multiple lives. Well, the latter assumption ensures that yogis attempt to attain liberation in one life, one or a few. That is far safer than disregarding certain cyclic existence, that inevitable cyclic existence. Atman, or self-realization, is always the yearning of the monad or the being, the goal, the longing, or whatever you want to call it. That's right. It's just safer to assume, especially when there's so much talk about the end of Kali Yuga, and it's not just a completely unusual, esoteric rumor that very few people talk about. It's something that comes up a lot in different religious communities. And if you look at the facts, yeah, things are getting worse, but you have to meditate on it to really know. That person may have been commenting on another user who had an objection to this presentation. They said, "We are beyond labels and names, though both duality and non-duality equally matter. But I wish you would see that seeing beings as simply an Atman only goal with 3,000 rounds is not only nonsensible, but extremely foolish and dangerous to follow." So this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, though, the extremely foolish and dangerous to follow part, because the only thing you'd be avoiding is certain prevention of devolution. Now, 3,000 rounds was taught by Samuel Onwaor, but most people think that cyclic existence is infinite, and that would entail even more suffering, just endless rounds within samsara. But no, there is a limit to it, and that's good. Otherwise, it's just endless. It is sensible because these cycles have a lifespan. Nothing that is living lasts forever. The Buddha said only 3 things in the universe are eternal, right? Space, karma, or samsara. This particular process of transmigration is actually quite widely understood, and it's pretty basic because the Bhavachakra explains it visually. And the Buddha instructed that that symbol is so important, it should be in every temple or monastery. And as such, in this process, souls don't jump around on the wheel except on special occasions. So what is more foolish? To assume that one has multiple human incarnations and the free will and the power to do pretty much anything through this idea of manifestation and parallel universe creation, so that we can do a little bit of spirituality and enjoy our life a little bit, relax, take our time, provide a little bit of service, take a break, take a few days off, go on a vacation, come back and have this very lackadaisical attitude or lifestyle, thinking that we're trying our best and thinking that we're vibrating higher, and we're still fulfilling so many preferences and conditions instead of just letting everything go, in the hopes that we will be reborn again as a human. Surely. 5, 10, 20 lives. Or is it wiser to follow the guidance of many masters who've all warned about this? Dalai Lama, Samael Aun Shunyamurti, who all claim that this humanity is at the end of its evolution. So similarly, another user says, modern studies demonstrate what the ancients said: everything is God, everything is one, we are God, fractalized. There is only God who is the source energy. And they're essentially saying here that we can manifest any reality that we want. And so most of this comment, most of it's true, but the only inaccuracy is the ability to create our own realities through free will. Because everything has a kind of a limit, or every being has its own limitations, right? Everything has to be within a scale. And so that ability of free will and parallel universe creation, it doesn't grant us unlimited power and creativity. The most fundamental laws of the universe are karma, interdependence, emptiness, or the absolute. These are all fixed. Likewise, karma or samsara, the process of transmigration, that is also an eternal law. And even if the highest God, if Source could break its own rules that it established in this game, he, she, they almost never do, because they prefer to keep their word. It's disrespectful to the rules of existence, and it hurts a lot of other people to break the rules. This user says something similar, but is very... They said to say none of us are the I am, which was a earlier comment I made, is to dismiss the nature's fractals concept, and I will just have to disagree with you there. That's what they said. Again, this is one of those matters where we're getting confused between conventional reality and ultimate reality. Right? The answer kind of depends if you're thinking how this applies to us right now or ultimately in God's perspective, right? So yes, actually, we are intrinsically the I am, right? The Buddha explained fractals when he said that each soul is like a crystal that contains a reflection of the source Buddha nature, the Tathagata or Tathagata, the I am. But however, the self exists in many levels for us, right? That's why there's such a thing as beings, billions of individual people and creatures, perspectives, their subjective perspective. So for us, the I am, the Tathagata, it's not developed. And that's why we have personal opinion. That's why we have different perspectives. That's why there are so many of us in this universe as individuals, not as one. That Tathagata is just a tiny little seed in us. And that's why it's also called a Garbha, Tathagata Garbha, which means Buddha nature seed, essentially. So if we were fully realized, we would not be here physically. Or at least at the end of our life, we would not reincarnate. We would then rest in the emptiness. But until then, we're not developed as the I am or the Tathagata. We are individuals in samsara who really need to find a way out for once. This user asks, does spilling the cup of Hermes is it typically associated with Kundalini rising? Well, it could be if you're but this is more like if you're somebody who never really masturbates or has sex and you're rising raising your kundalini could cause a couple, nocturnal emissions that are involuntary. But typically, no. I mean, spilling the cup of Hermes, especially if it's deliberate, that happens we do this out of, well, it happens out of habit. So it can either a deliberate habit or it continues to happen in usually nocturnal emissions. Both for men and women, spilling the semen also just means having an orgasm. It's coming either from ordeals of lust or just repeated thought forms in dreams, like succubi and incubi. These thought forms that emerge and they tempt you. And if you fall for them, you create lust. At the very least, you create some lust. And then, you have the incubi and succubi. These are like the astral larvae that feed on these thought forms. Feed on the low vibration energies, actually, the lust. I mean, only sometimes on occasion, kundalini rising or just a lot of energy blockages and buildup. Like in some people's cases, if you're stressed or if you exhaust yourself doing a kind of a very monotonous, laborious task for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours straight, the energy can build. And especially if you feel pressured or rushed when you're doing that, or you feel stressed and you want to take a break, but you can't. If you do something like that for a while, that kind of physical exertion, energy can get blocked in certain areas. It can stay in one place. And I've heard that energy tends to get blocked around the sacrum or near the root chakra. And this can cause, again, nocturnal emissions. Or stress from brooding emotions, like brooding anger, also can do it. There's a similar feeling of just feeling stressed and pressured. This pressure builds up in your body from brooding anger or labor and impatience. So the best thing is to take breaks and, be in the middle, right? Keep your minds as still as you can. Keep your body relaxed. Work steadily and slowly if you do physical labor, or even on the computer too. Actually, you can get that kind of stress. And then if you space it out and you take short breaks every now and then, you stretch, the tension won't build as much and you'll be okay. This is from a user who wasn't part of the lecture, but they saw the presentation, and they say, "People, stop believing in Quakery. Don't you people realize that he is making this stuff up? How does the soul store and process information? What purpose does the information that a soul acquires from living as a fly or as an electrician help in the upper level? How brain gives us our level of consciousness, the end of brain functioning, is the end of our consciousness. The reluctance to accept that we are mortals is the source of all of this nonsense. Live this life the best you can because it is the only one you will have." Well, I wouldn't be the only one making it up then, if that were true. So to answer your question, there was a question here. The ultimate purpose of the information we obtain during the journey of evolution is something called self-realization, coming to know the root source of consciousness within all beings, the root Buddha. The simple explanation behind reincarnation is this: energy cannot be destroyed. Every physicist pretty much knows this. We also know that consciousness is a form of energy. Everything is, from sound waves to radio waves and beyond. Emotion, intellect, intuition. No creature or thing can exist without energy, of course. Thus, when the body and brain expire, the energy of our consciousness remains. So our consciousness must continue on and find another physical vessel, if that's the level we're at. Every consciousness has a certain level to it and needs a certain kind of housing or vessel, like a capacitor. So no, the brain doesn't produce the consciousness. We live in a field of consciousness. Consciousness is in everything. It is life. The brain is just a vessel that specifies how field consciousness should function and behave. Or how could it be that the end of brain functioning is the end of consciousness if consciousness itself carries an energetic value for each creature? So there's if you want to learn a little bit more about this, or you want a little bit more proof about scriptures actually explaining or mentioning anything about devolution and evolution, there's an analytical write-up called Devolution and Evolution in the Agana Sutta. It was written in 2013 and posted in academia.edu. This user says, hey, genuine question here. What did you mean when you said semen retention around the Bodhisattva Buddha extraterrestrial part? And another question is, if lust is something to not be practiced, then what is up with the sexual things happening in evolution? Well, to answer this question, I should add that all Buddhas must have a high degree of chastity, or brahmacharya, in order to transmute their sexual energies for the maintenance of health, the endocrine system, the nervous system, intuition, and even the killing of defects. So this is absolutely critical. Bodhisattvas practice this at the highest level. They cannot leak sexual energy through bodily sexual lubricants or corrupted thoughts or overexertion. Semen retention regenerates the brain too and maintains access to superconsciousness or intuition. The full doctrine, including the sexual mysteries, helps us develop bodhicitta, or wisdom heart-mind. This is an upright attitude and way of seeing that is intelligent and wise and compassionate. So simply put, we can't develop objective perception or compassion if our vital or etheric bodies are unhealthy or lack energy. Now, to answer your second question, life is a great game or challenge, especially with our planet and creatures. And this is why the animals who are evolving into humans gradually, they reproduce more and more through lust or animal sexuality. This is part of our origin karma that has caused animals to kill for food and caused childbirth to be painful. The previous root races before us were not like this. They were fourth dimensional and even lighter and higher in dimensions, so to speak. So this is a very big challenge for us modern humans in the fifth race, or root race, I should say, because we have to conquer the most crude, stubborn animal instincts in order to continue evolution into higher kingdoms. The way that creatures evolve and become more advanced also makes them more degenerated and conditioned, you see? When we conquer animal sexuality, we can practice suprasexuality, which doesn't contain or involve desire or attachment, just love and adornment. And this is taught in Tantrayana or Vajrayana Buddhism. The same user then is now saying, this worldview is fascinating and illuminating in many aspects. But that being said, it seems to be a very Earth-centric worldview and doesn't take into account the fact that Earth School is just one of many worlds that the human soul incarnates on. As such, this worldview doesn't seem to take into account the many lessons and much growth and evolution that occurs to the soul while incarnated to other worlds or on other worlds, or even the fact that time is not linear and that the soul can be incarnated on numerous worlds at once, undergoing many lessons and stages of development simultaneously and interdependently. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This presentation is made to be most relevant to the beings on this planet during this particular time. So it's my intention that we concern ourselves with our own root race or epoch, and planet before considering the processes and the helping of other planets and species. The process of transmigration is fundamental, and therefore it's the same everywhere for nearly all planets and galaxies and solar systems. Even though the being or monad shares more than one soul shard, because of the level that most people are at in this Kali Yuga or Dark Age, it's not relevant or helpful to take interest in our other halves. What you mentioned as beings split up into parallel universes in different time periods and different timelines. As modern Kali Yugs, because we don't have the vital energy or the health and the time to learn things like transference of consciousness or soul merging or reincarnation in the truth sense, where you consciously navigate and choose your circumstances for the next life. This is actually something that a master does. So what happens to us, we just return, or we are reborn. That's the actual term. Rebirth or return. And an individual soul shard doesn't go through rebirth on other planets if they are still in the process of completing a transmigration round, unless the being decides to place them elsewhere. This is a phenomenon that only occurs when souls earn it through Dharma service or purity. Soul shards can't travel to or reincarnate themselves onto other planets if they don't have solar bodies. We have typically, most of us have phantom lunar bodies, and they're limited to the orbit of the moon. They're lunar astral bodies. Only the being can rebirth a soul elsewhere. It is otherwise normal for a soul to be reborn on a different planet or galaxy. And it does happen all the time where souls are just simply reborn on different planets. But it's usually for a reason. It's not for fun or for an experience. It's usually just because that planet isn't safe anymore. The accumulation of soul shards evolving on different galaxies and at different stages provides the being wisdom. Regarding the functioning of time, this video simply is comparing evolution to our conventional way of perceiving and understanding time. I didn't bother explaining parallel universes and other directions of time here. But basically, you have split versions of yourself. You have soul shards of yourself on other planets and galaxies. And sometimes there are walk-in souls. There are a lot of people experiencing walk-ins, where an aspect, usually of their own soul, a different soul shard comes into their body from a different planet or galaxy to help you work, and vice versa. You can be transferred to another planet or body. But with the consciousness that we have, our experience is still very individual, very separated. So if you don't perceive yourself in a different body or a different planet, you're still here. Unless you have solar bodies and you're awakened, only your being can provide you a different circumstance, a different world to work on, a different body. But with the level of consciousness we have, we can only experience one timeline at a time for the most part, until we start developing that skill of astral projection and time traveling, parallel universe creation. Here's another remark that needs some clarification. They say, I agree. To urgently evolve is to enact the desire to not experience hell, which is a desire in and of itself. To accept the ego and the animalistic tendencies that arise with existing in a human body is, I think, the way forward. If the soul needs to be purified, then so be it. It shall do so on its own accord. Well, there is such thing as the attachment to nirvana or nibbana itself, the attachment to enlightenment, which I believe is one of the 10 fetters. So if there really is a strong, desperate attachment for enlightenment, then that, yes, that will become an obstacle. But that's different than having a longing or a yearning, a very intrinsic yearning, this inquisitiveness that the soul naturally has. The being pushes the conditioned souls to try to change, to seek the Dhamma, to stumble across it, and to follow it. There needs to be some initial self-interest, a little bit, because we have so much ego, but it's just enough to look into the practice, to start taking action. And then at that point, we're doing this work because of a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility. So as long as you're not too attached or too stressed out, you'll be fine. So based on right effort in Buddhism, the fetter of having an attachment to enlightenment is not the excuse to do nothing, to put no effort. The objective is to have awareness and concern. Another user here asks, why is the soul waiting so long to correct its karma? Why is my ego on the hook for all the lives that have existed before me? If I have lived at least 108 lifetimes as a human, then why on the 109th time I have experienced death? Upon experiencing death, should my soul now experience hell? Well, everything is a cycle and has a limit. It just so happens to be that 108 is approximately the amount of humanoid lives that every soul gets. It's pretty universal. But of course, nature is created with numbers, right? There's a whole structure created through numbers. So that 108 just happens to be the kind of the number that's responsible for the closing of cycles. Any kind of cycle in nature. We see 108 everywhere. But normally it's more like 9. It expresses itself as the value of 9. So everything has a cycle and a limit. We didn't choose these numbers. The yogis and the teachers, they didn't invent these numbers. They were already there. They're intrinsic. Everything is a birth, a maturity, a sustain, a decay, and a death. Nothing lasts forever except for the things that don't inherently exist. The Buddha mentioned them: karma, insubstantiality, non-self, and emptiness. Mineral and plant elemental souls that are not self-realized carry very little karma, but just enough to exist. Their existence makes a karma accumulate over time as they develop complex behaviors in evolution. Nature gives us a very large margin of time to experience life with more and more karma, but there comes a point where beings with tremendous conditioning and karma become insane and dysfunctional. So our inability to control our words, emotions, behaviors, our discussing of meaningless, silly things, depression, addictions, anxiety, obsessive compulsions, and then, eventually, fights, arguments, wars. It's just impossible to sustain that kind of psychology without becoming self-destructive. So nature doesn't allow these kinds of beings like us to persist. It's too dangerous for other civilizations. So 108 equals the numeric value of 9. You just sum the numbers down into a single digit. 1 plus 0 plus 8 equals 9. It's the closing of cycles. It's just the limit of the human cycle before any possible degeneration gets out of hand. And 9 applies for any kind of cycle of karma. Another user here remarked something like, okay, so 3,000 rebirths as a human, and then we rest eternally. Excellent. Yeah, I read this a while ago. It's not here right now, but I know exactly what he said. It was a pretty big misunderstanding. So to clarify that, in case anyone didn't quite catch how this process really works, that 3,000 is rounds of evolution across or through the entire wheel of samsara. The different kingdoms of nature, right? The 6 realms of life. From hell to animal to human to nirvana. Also, there's a hungry ghost realm that's between animal and hell realm. And so each time we pass through the wheel, this is really eternities of time. This isn't 3,000 human lives. It's 108 human lives multiplied by 3,000 rounds of evolution. 108 human lives times 3,000 opportunities. Within those human lives, you have many opportunities to follow the Dharma because it will be given to you. You will stumble across it. You will find it. Just to clear that up, because that's very important to understand. Right? And the polar realms last longer. Heaven lasts tens of thousands to millions of years. Hell lasts between 500,000 years and millions of years, depending on whether or not you have solar bodies. Now that's another topic in its own right. So each round is an inconceivable amount of time. Any more questions? Okay, that looks to be it. Thank you very much.